of Warwick. Thanks for joining us. What do you think the Foreign Secretary will achieve on his trade mission?
Good afternoon, Juliet. Just to put that in context, as he just said, the United Kingdom has left the EU and it is now in a new world, and the Prime Minister gave a speech about his vision for the United Kingdom in this new world. The hardest negotiations will be the ones over the coming months with the European Union. In that context, his Foreign Minister, Mr. Raab, is, as he just mentioned, is on a trip to try to establish trade deals with the countries that he just mentioned. And he's currently in Australia. The noises coming out at the moment are favorable in terms of Australians wanting to have a deal with the United Kingdom. And just to say finally that this is important for the UK in the EU negotiations context, because in order to establish their bargaining power on that negotiations with the EU, they need to start urgently rather than later to have some credible progress on these free trade deals with Australia and so on.
So he's in Australia, but of course there are lots of conversations going on around trade or all around the world. Well, what do you think of the UK's position, how they're positioning themselves?
I think they're trying to paint, and it goes back to the PM's speech earlier on, a few days back, basically that the UK is, as I said, in a new world. It's left the EU after so many years, and it's a new player, if you like, on the world stage, and it's ready to make ambitious deals, foreign trade, free agreement trade deals with these countries, which wasn't possible till now. So at the moment it's a conversation around how can we have a conversation. I think what's important is that over the coming months that there's some credibility in the progress with Australia, with China, with the US, with Singapore and so on. So we're the right conversation, the right language and vision is being painted, but it's early days actually to say what this new world in terms of agreements with Australia and so on will look like. The ambition is there. You can see that quite clearly from the United Kingdom government point of view.
Well, Boris Johnson's trade plans don't seem to include the EU's calls for a level playing field. What do you think about that?
So let me just put that in context. So one of the things that the Prime Minister here, Boris Johnson, needs, and is the flexibility to make these free trade deals with other countries, United States and China, and therefore he's announced that he can't totally align himself with the EU rules, with the EU regulations as the European Unions would want him to do. And that's going to be one sticking point in the negotiations with the EU over the coming months. You need that flexibility to customize a trade deal with the US, with China and so on. So, and with that comes, and that's the EU's worry, is that UK having within this region an unfair competitive advantage by not aligning its rules with the European countries. And so that will be, by the way, one of the interesting things that we'll see how it pans out over the coming weeks and months. I mean, just to give you an example, you know, the United Kingdom last week agreed for Huawei to, in a limited form, limited way, to help the UK with its 5G network stuff. There may be lots of reasons for having done that and carefully considered, but one thing in terms of negotiations, it builds a rapport with China. One of the first major OECD countries doing that, and in turn it's going to increase the likelihood down the line a UK-China deal. And so that's quite strategic maneuver on the part of the British government, the UK Prime Minister, from that angle, and it increases his bargaining power vis-à-vis the negotiations with the EU and other countries.
But let me ask you about the United States, because you talk about how that gains currency with China and perhaps the European Union, but of course another important trading partner is the United States. So in a nutshell, what might the biggest obstacles be there?
You know, there'll be, you know, that's why it's a negotiations. There are going to be many kinds of obstacles in any of these free trade deals, including the US.